This is your life as a Lannister, unhurried, watchful, and written in patient light. If this calms you, feel free to subscribe. It keeps these bedtime journeys coming. Where are you listening from? Now, quietly, to Casterly Rock, where the story begins. Dawn lifts like a coin from the western sea, and Casterly Rock wakes without hurry. The fortress seems carved from a single thought: endurance. Salt mist climbs the cliffs, gulls turn like pages, and deep below the caverns breathe their cold. You open a window cut by ancestors and let the tide set your pulse to a slower drum. This is the house of lions and ledgers, a mountain seated on its own hoard. Gold hides in ribs of stone, a patient harvest older than any lord who claims it. Ships in Lannisport answer to that glitter, even when their sails hang slack. Ropes creak, shutters clap, and a city blinks into trade with the stubborn calm of habit. Stories arrive with the fishmongers and the dyers, and one returns more than most: Lan the Clever, sly as sea wind, who gained the rock without sword or siege. Some say he tricked the Casterlys into fleeing haunted halls. Others say he whispered to tunnels no soldier could map. The truth is veiled by time, yet the lesson endures. Wit can move mountains when iron cannot. Within the rock, passages braid and widen, then narrow to careful throats. You learn them the way a harpist learns strings, by feel and listening. Polished banisters recall 100 winters of hands weary and jeweled alike. Torchlight flares, settles, and writes calm amber on carved lions, standing watch beside every door. In the great hall, a table holds the maps that matter: coasts, roads, granaries, and a ledger of debts owed to and by the West. Maesters murmur their morning counts, while stewards translate numbers into bread and coal. The rock's strength is not only its height, it is its accounting. What is counted is cared for. What is cared for returns with interest. Outside, the harbor spreads like a polished shield. Dockmasters check stamps on cargo crates. Scribes tally sacks of barley and barrels of old ale. Behind them, an armorer hammers rings into a shirt of mail, each ring a promise that someone will come home. The city believes in mornings because the sea always keeps its appointment with the shore. You are taught to greet mornings as treaties. Breakfast holds both bread and briefings. A lesson in heraldry is a lesson in history. A lesson in coinage is a lesson in trust. The 7-pointed star glints beside a scale weight on the steward's table, and a quiet balance is struck between mercy and mathematics before the day even begins. The house words "Hear me roar" are not trumpeted at sunrise. They arrive as a steady warmth behind the ribs, reminding you to stand tall, to speak plainly, to pay your debts on time and in full. Another saying follows you like a well-trained hound. None official, all remembered. A Lannister always pays his debts. It is promise and pressure bound together under a single clasp. At noon, the cliff path smells of salt, tar, and juniper needles crushed under hoof. From here, you watch Lannisport breathe. Roof smoke, drying nets, and banners faded to soft fruit colors. Every shop sign is a small oath to endurance. The dyers use rain barrels like mirrors. The glassblowers turn sunset into goblets people will raise at weddings you will never attend. You practice the art of seeing, not merely looking, but finding the hinge on which a day turns. A delayed ship means market prices will climb. A sick mule means a cart of ore will miss the smelter's window. Small causes, clear effects. When you can read a city's breath, you are ready to speak softly to it. In the afternoon, you visit the mines, where galleries echo with pick and wheel. Torches breathe and fail, then live again, and the air tastes of metal and damp cloth. You do not dig, you observe. The mine captain speaks of supports and safety, and you understand the rock's blunt truth. To keep taking, you must know how much may be safely taken. The maester shows you coin minted under different reigns, edges clipped, weights honest or sly. You learn why a fair weight is a better thrown than a sharp sword. Trade travels on trust the way a ship travels on water. A leak in either may drown men who never meant to swim. so you keep the scales true and rumor kinder than it might be. In the records room, ledgers form a forest of winter oaks, dense and orderly. You touch calfskin spines and feel time arranged like fields after harvest. Here are rents and remissions, repairs to roads after storms, seed loans forgiven when rains failed. Power lives in these quiet shelves. Any fool can shout, but only patient hands sustain a coast. You ask about mercy and are answered with shipping schedules. Mercy is bread kept affordable, a granary opened early, a levy postponed until after the herring run. Kindness wears work clothes here. It stacks crates and sets fair prices. The house that practices it loudly is a braggart. The house that practices it quietly sleeps better. It is tempting to call this life freedom, because no one gives you orders in a raised voice, yet you sense the collar beneath the gold. Expectation holds like fitted armor that you dare not remove. Some nights, the name around your shoulders feels worse than a slave, because the lock is pride and the key sits inside your own careful hand. Lannisport's guilds send envoys with petitions written in tidy hands. A harbor fee adjusted by a single copper shifts whole streets of commerce. Raise it too quickly and fishermen sell nets. Lower it foolishly and roads go hungry for repairs. You picture causes like stones dropped in a harbor, and you wait to move until the ripples show their map. You ride inland to a hill where the western wind keeps gossip with the grass. The farms are terraces of patient labor, bounded by dry stone walls that look like music held inside stone. Children chase a ball made from wrapped rags and laugh as if winter were a rumor. You remember the ledgers and vow that your sums will keep such laughter possible. Back at the rock, a steward brings letters sealed with green wax from the riverlands, blue from the veil, the red of the crown. You weigh each note before you read it because paper can be heavier than iron. A message is a door. Opening it obliges you to walk through. A raven arrives rain-soaked and indignant, bearing a contract renewal for timber rights upriver. You compare this year's price to last year's flood damage and accept a smaller profit rather than strain a neighbor already mending bridges. Generosity here is practical. It buys resilience you cannot mint. Night closes the harbor, and lanterns climb the masts like new constellations. From the balcony, you can see the line where sea becomes dark sky. It looks like a ledger drawn by a patient hand. Tally the day. No riots. Plenty of bread. Coin counted twice. 3 letters answered with clarity. Sleep will come. Unremarkable and earned. Of the legends, some do not agree, and you treat disagreement the way a good smith treats sparks. Expected, even useful, whether the land the clever used mummery, tunnels, or merely starving patience. The part that matters is the inheritance of craft. The rock is a fortress, yes, but it is also a long lesson about how wit must serve more than itself. In the armory, a master-at-arms polishes a helm until it returns the lamp as a small moon. He teaches you to lift a sword, not to swing it like a bell, but to measure its weight honestly. He says a sword is a promise that should rarely be spoken. You sheath it and feel relief greater than any thrill of draw. The port reeve asks for repairs to the breakwater after a winter of heavy tides. You approve quarry crews and extra wages because a sound wall is cheaper than a replacement fleet. The decision seems unglamorous, and it is, yet it saves more lives than any tournament. Proper stones in the right place turn storms into weather. A caravan from the Reach arrives with apples crisp as new coin and a rumor shaped like a smile. Someone's cousin swears the crown considers a tariff on Dornish wine. You taste your apple, let the rumor sit on your tongue, and decide to write 3 letters. 1 to the steward of the port, 1 to a friendly broker in Old Town, and 1 to the crown's master of coin. You write without ornament. The best sentences in such matters end without flourish and stand upright on their own legs. You ask questions that guide rather than accuse. You include a chart sketched in the margin showing harbor loads by month. Precision, you find, is a kind of courtesy. It spares others from guessing your meaning. A delegation of miners waits in the West Gallery, caps in hand, boots clean but old. They ask for new supports in the lower drift, the one that trembles when wagons pass above. You approve the timbers, and most importantly, the time to install them safely. A rich seam is a blessing until it becomes a grave. Prudence keeps blessings honest. By late supper, the hall smells of roast onion and black pepper. You sit, you listen, you offer small praise where it fits, and keep your appetite moderate. Showy hunger in a lord's hall makes small folk anxious. You eat enough to honor the cooks and leave enough to honor tomorrow. Alone in your chamber, you run a thumb over the lion on your signet and feel the press of yesterday's hands. The ring is heavy for its size, heavier still with all the promises it represents. You remind yourself that a name is a tool, not a master. Tools must be handled, not worshipped. You leave the ring on the table while you breathe and watch the sea. Sometimes duty arrives with flowers. A marriage for a cousin brings 3 new trade routes and an ally with healthy herds. You are glad for the couple and for the herds. Joy and logistics mix easily in the West. You send cheeses, a fair dowry supplement, and a letter that praises both families with equal warmth. This is politics as gardening, watering friendships you will someday rely on. Another letter nicks your calm. A border lord delays payment, citing a poor harvest and bandits. You send riders with relief grain and 2 extra men for the nearest holdfast, and you cut the late fee in half. You are not soft. You are careful. Bread now turns rebels into farmers later. On a clear night, the rock hums with the small industry of rest. Stable hands brush horses until they shine like poured tea. The smith covers his coals so the fire sleeps. A watchman coughs and then apologizes to the stars. Lannisport grows quiet enough that you can hear your own restraint. Restraint, you are told, is the first steward of any fortune. Spend pride slowly. Save noise for storms. Keep rage on a short rope and let kindness run longer. The rules sound simple until they are asked to hold a hall full of hungry opinions. Practice turns principles into muscle. You train yours every day, the way sailors train balance. When guests arrive from the riverlands, you greet them with clean towels and boiled water for the road out of respect. They tell a version of Castamere you have never heard, and you do not correct them. Truth in Westeros has edges, and legends will always choose their preferred corners. You pour their cups and file the discrepancies in a private ledger where only humility can read. At the end of a long week, you walk the cliff path again. The rock's shadow reaches almost to the harbor, and the water takes it without complaint. You think of the generations stacked behind you like strata in stone, each leaving rooms, roads, and rules. You try to add something small and useful to the stack. A fairer toll, a repaired key, a kinder phrase. The sea teaches the last lesson of the day. It returns and returns, never bored by duty. It troubles no one with its importance, and yet it shapes every life here. You are fortunate to live in its company. You imitate its patience. When you finally lie down, the waves keep counting on your behalf until morning finds you ready. Childhood in the rock is a school of hours, each polished by repetition until it shines. Morning brings bows to elders and small kindnesses to those who rise earlier than you. You learn names long before you meet their bearers: reeves, factors, masons, midwives. The work of a house is 1,000 quiet hands, and you are taught to notice all of them. Your tutors mix lessons the way a vintner blends harvests. There is reading of charters and old songs, sums and cipher, histories of rivers, and the etiquette of arrival. How far to ride before dismounting, where to hand your gloves, when to let silence speak first. These details feel small until you see how quickly they steady a room. The maester's ravenry is a fog of feathers and ink. You learn knots for message cylinders, the meaning of wax colors, the trick of keeping hands calm when a bird startles. Ravens are not symbols to you. They are schedules. When storms maroon ships, ravens carry markets on their backs. In the practice yard, a wooden sword weighs more than pride. You do not swing to impress. You learn how not to waste motion. The master-at-arms talks about fatigue the way poets talk about love, carefully. He teaches you that glory is a poor teacher, habit is better, and survives winter. When you tire, the scepter sets a bowl of water beside you and asks a small question. What is strength for? You give answers suitable for a child, then for a student, then for someone who must one day decide where carts should roll. By evening, you understand that real strength is a road people can use without thinking about it. Feasts arrive with the rhythm of tides, saints' days, marriages, the first pressing of oil. You are placed at tables as carefully as a candle among drapes. Seating is language. Proximity is argument. You learn to translate. One seat closer means a fence is mended. One farther means a rumor needs pruning. Your elders speak of banner houses with the tact of physicians. No one is entirely well or entirely ill. Everyone needs the right medicine at the right hour. A late levy is a fever. A boastful envoy a rash. The rock prefers remedies to scolding and cures to banners on poles. Between lessons, you walk the cliff path with a swan sword older than your parents. He names winds as if they were kin: dusk wind, herring wind, the cruel northbourne that cracks lips. He tells you that a good God watches the weather in people as closely as in the sky. You practice noticing the shift before the squall. You visit the counting house and watch a factor convert ore to coin, coin to credit, credit to loyalty that does not yell when storms come. He shows how a fair loan sows two harvests, one in the field, one in a friendship that returns when needed. These are the invisible walls that make a keep strong long after torches gutter. At the key, you kneel to a child who has skinned her knee. You offer a clean cloth, then order sand swept from the broken plank where she fell. Care for one board, and a dozen knees will never be bloodied. The harbor master smiles and calls you thoughtful. You call it arithmetic by other means. The first time you ride out past the vineyards, the land reads like a ledger you can finally sound out. Dry stone walls, old as the old tales, hold pasture like good grammar. Cows drowse under a sky bright enough to ring. Your escort points toward a shrine barely taller than a man and tells you it marks a flood that drowned a season. You are asked to say something. You say that the stones should remain, the path rerouted, and the shrine repaired with fresh lime. It is not masterful policy. It is merely respect for weather and memory. The old woman tending the shrine nods in a way that feels like a small knighthood. On the ride back, you feel taller without growing at all. At lessons in the Great Solar, the old histories speak with two voices. One voice praises courage, the other praises maintenance. You learn to watch for both, because houses that remember only courage forget to oil hinges, and doors unoiled will betray you at the worst possible hour. A silent tutor, the walls themselves, shows you how sound travels. Whisper near the spiral stair, and it climbs like ivy. Speak near the kitchens, and the steam devours it. You choose your words according to stone, and in doing so, become harder to surprise. Security is often a matter of knowing which rooms keep secrets and which rooms eat them. In Lannisport, a cooper lets you try the last hoop on a barrel. Your first attempt warps the staves. Your second holds. He says nothing, just nods toward a row of casks that will carry salted fish to the riverlands. You realize the West travels in circles of iron from hands that never sign letters. Your mother, or an aunt wise enough to serve as one, lectures you about praise. Accept it, but do not breathe it. Praise is incense, sweet, smoky, and dangerous when it thickens. Better to leave a hall smelling faintly of work than heavy with compliments. If someone must speak of you after you leave, let them use numbers, not adjectives. When a visiting lord brags about the hunters on his lands, you walk him to the cliff at dawn. He sees ships easing out with the tide, nets like patient wings, and admits that a fisherman lands more dinners than a falcon ever could. He laughs and promises trade. Pride bends easily when offered usefulness instead of scorn. You keep a small book, leather soft as old fruit, in which you write one sentence each day. Sometimes it is a policy. Reduce the salt tax by a grain weight for winter. Sometimes it is a prayer. Let the sea keep its appointments. Over time, the book becomes a map of how quietly a child can grow into a steward. There are games, but even they teach. Counting stones against the clock sharpens choices. A tile game from Old Town rewards patience over flash. You lose for a month, then begin to win by doing less. It is the first time you learn that restraint can be a tool sharper than a spear point. In the evenings, an old retainer tells stories of the rains that differ from the singer's tune. He trims the teeth from the tale and leaves only the lesson. Listen longer than your pride wants to. He says the worst dangers come wrapped in applause. You sleep that night with the window open, letting the wind edit your dreams. One afternoon, you ask the steward why the house keeps a fund to replace fallen boats. He says storms are cheap teachers if you buy their lessons quickly. A family rebuilt this season will pay you back for 20. You pencil that into your book and realize you are learning a language without knowing when you started. You begin to notice how adults use silence. Some silence dismisses, some invites, some forgives. You practice the forgiving kind. In the yard, two boys quarrel over a practice shield. You listen, ask one question, and watch them trade apologies like bread. It feels like cheating, yet everyone eats. In the rookery, you learn to read weather on the raven's patience. When they are irritable, storms prowl the edge of the map. When they preen, journeys will be easy. You carry that habit to people. A merchant who smooths his sleeves is ready for fair terms. One who clicks his tongue fears a loss he cannot name. A septon visiting from the Reach speaks of charity as a set of doors you open in order. First for your own, then for neighbors, then for strangers whose trade keeps the road alive. You like the orderliness of it. Compassion does not have to be chaotic. It can be shelved and fetched exactly when needed. You ask about the saying that follows your house like a well-bred shadow, paying debts. The steward answers with a story about a winter 2 generations past, when ships sat frozen to their own harbors. The rock sent credit instead of coin, grain instead of steel, and collected later not with interest, but with alliances that still bear fruit in summer. A letter arrives from the capital requesting a promising child to serve as a page at court. You are not chosen, and the disappointment is a small stone that sits in the shoe of your day. By evening, you are grateful for the stone. It teaches you to walk without fuss. Wanting less is not defeat. It is breathing room. Your first taste of court comes instead through travelers' tales. They describe the Red Keep's steep steps and a city that tries to forget its river's smell with spice. They speak of gold cloaks that shine like late afternoon and whispers that travel faster than carts. You listen and decide you will arrive prepared to be ignored without losing your center. You practice writing with your non-dominant hand, because a maester once mentioned a lord who lost his favored fingers. The script is ugly, then legible. You keep it secret because having one quiet advantage feels like an amulet. Preparedness, you discover, is a gentler word for fear you have turned into a tool. On a winter noon, you stand watch as a merchant appeals a fine for watered wine. The proof is in the taste, and the proof is in the ledger's listing volume in and volume out. You reduce the fine by 1/3 and ask him to teach apprentices how to measure fairly. He leaves lighter, and so do you. Justice should weigh least when it works. The master-at-arms advances you from wood to blunted steel for a brief lesson in humility. The blade shows you where your pride has been hiding. You bow, you breathe, you correct the angle of your wrist. He smiles when you choose not to chase a victory you have not earned. You learn to like the sensation of stopping before the line grows crooked. Sometimes you envy the small folk who can step aside from the house's name. Then you see how the name shields them when storms rise. Responsibility is a wall you cannot leave, and they cannot build alone. Some nights, wrapped in blankets that smell of soap and cedar, that wall feels worse than a slave, because you must choose it again each morning and explain the choice with grace. A shipment of glass arrives with more flaws than stars. The guildmaster trembles, expecting fury. You instead buy the lot at a discount on condition the glass be used for greenhouses along the coast. 2 seasons later, lemons hang like lanterns where wind once ruled. Profit finds many roads when pride steps aside. As adolescence arrives, the tutors stop answering and start asking, what would you do if the port were blocked by storm for 10 days? How do you keep prices fair when rumor outruns ships? You learn to spool answers that include both bread and dignity. A scribe teaches you how to close a letter with clarity. Do not let the last sentence wobble. Do not promise what weather will break. Give the reader something to carry that is lighter than worry and heavier than air. You copy your best closings onto a scrap you keep under the blotter. On the day your voice deepens, you test it in the miner's hall. It carries better than you expected, but only when you slow down. Haste blurs consonants. Arrogance blurs meaning. You choose neither. A woman with silver in her hair calls you well-spoken, the best kind of compliment, because it names discipline, not charm. A cousin returns from Old Town with books about trade winds and a taste for cider. He shows you charts where arrows loop like dancers. Suddenly, storms feel conversational rather than cruel. You write a policy to stagger departures by tide and season. Fewer ships sulk for want of a wind. Another cousin stumbles home with debts that glint like broken glass. The rock pays them and pays again in rules that reach all the way to you. For a season, you go nowhere without a sober companion. Pride argues, prudence wins. You learn the mercy of guardrails installed before anyone else crashes. When the harvest festival arrives, the square fills with pies shaped like suns and children pretending to be lions. You buy too many pastries and give them away. A baker laughs, saying a lion must have 2 stomachs. You answer that a house does, one for hunger and one for hope. At last, the message you expected and dreaded comes. You are to serve a season in King's Landing. It is framed as opportunity and evaluation, both. You bow to your elders and the portrait gallery alike. Under their oil-dark eyes, you feel like a ledger entry being posted to a larger book. You pack with care, leave your little journal hidden in the wall, and sleep lightly for the first time in years. On the last evening before departure, you walk the battlements and count harbor lights like quiet prayers. You promise the sea you will remember its patience in every crowded room. You promise the rock you will return with steadier judgment. The wind answers without opinion, and that too feels like counsel. Gentle, usable counsel. The road to King's Landing begins with wet leather and cautious hope. You ride with sworn swords, a steward, and 2 carts of gifts chosen for use, not show. Between hedges and fog, you review the letters that will carry your first season at court. Clarity feels like armor. You polish each sentence until it holds weight. By the time the black water's tide-stained air folds around you, the city has already pressed its thumbs into your patience. Hawkers call from shadowed lanes. Apprentices run like darting fish. You keep your eyes level and your pockets calm. The Red Keep climbs the hill like a question you will answer slowly. A chamberlain greets you with a smile measured to the inch. Your rooms are clean, the view unromantic. Rooftops, chimneys, a slice of river like tarnished plate. A basket of fruit waits on the table beside a stack of petitions, scented with different inks. Welcome means work, and you find that comforting. At your first small council session, you are not asked to speak. You stand along the wall with other fresh arrivals. and learn the city's manners by listening. Maps bloom across the table, trade routes, harvest reports, garrison strengths. Every finger that taps a parchment seems to move a village you will never see. A broker from the Goldcloaks quarter begs for coin to mend their barracks roof before the rains. The master of coin asks 3 questions that sound like one. What will this purchase prevent later? The broker blinks, then answers with fewer robberies, fewer bribes, fewer widows. The room nods. Even the simplest roof is a policy when placed correctly. Your first letter from home arrives folded like a little harbor. It speaks of a cracked pier stone and a new dyer whose purple will change how the market smells. You answer with a shipment schedule and thanks for the lavender scent with the seal. You breathe the scent and feel the rock place a palm against your back. Not all letters are friendly. A river lord seeks to delay a payment by 3 moons, claiming bandits. You request an accounting of losses and offer guards trained in patience. You ask the crown to excuse a portion of the levy if the accounts prove honest. Hardness without listening is just fear wearing armor. You prefer doors that may open again. A scribe shows you the archives, where law sleeps in stacks older than the current crown. You run a finger along spines that smell of tallow and rain. Some statutes contradict others like cousins who stopped speaking. You keep a list of which precedents steady ships and which make them pitch in a crosswind. At court, courtesy is not decoration. It is a traffic system. A bow signals deference. A pause signals thought. A smile signals willingness to walk the longer road. You discover how often a well-timed silence does the work of 30 words. Nonchalance becomes another form of armor you learn to buckle without looking. The crown's needs arrive with the soft thud of a pouch on a table. A city gate must be strengthened. A treaty escort must be funded. Carts must carry grain faster than rumors can sour it. You recommend provisions that make the roads safer for everyone, not just banners. A well-fed city tells fewer lies, and the truth saves coin in the end. You walk the fish market at dawn to learn prices by scent, not hearsay. Brine and lemon, wet rope and steam. These figures balance differently than ledgers do. A woman selling mussels tells you which taverns water ale and which noble kitchens forgive a bill when storms last. You pay double, not for her mussels, but for her memory. Your second council session turns toward the riverlands. A bridge fell in a storm. Boats now ferry carts 1 axle at a time. Someone suggests a levy increase to hurry the repairs. You suggest a loan instead, secured by spring tithes, because haste breeds resentment where generosity grows roots. An envoy from Dawn brings citrus and news salted with wit. She negotiates with a smile that never leaves her eyes. Over a quiet table, she explains how custom can be a riverbed rather than a wall. You leave with a draft for a shared patrol along the Boneway and 2 notes about wine labeling you never expected to write. Walking the outer walls at dusk, you watch crows settle like punctuation marks. Bells sound low and sure. The city, for all its clamor, has a heartbeat you can hum. You find you sleep better when you count that rhythm instead of your own thoughts. Patience, again, proves to be the door that opens quietly when others rattle keys. The first time someone tries to buy your opinion, it is almost artless. A hint about a cousin, a smile heavy with suggestion, a purse heavy with coin. You return the purse and keep the smile. Your refusal is not a lecture. It is a weight set gently back on the table. People remember gentleness longer than outrage. This becomes your way. You move the city by nudging what it wants to be. You write policy as if you are binding a wound, cleanly, quickly, with no extra flourish. You keep notes on who answers at once, who waits, who never answers, and therefore should not be asked again. Reputation begins to work for you in rooms you never enter. A festival floods the streets with color and noise. You ride slowly, cloak plain, signet quiet. People do not cheer a steward. They forgive one at best. That is enough. You buy honey cakes and ask the baker how much flour spoiled last season, because behind every sweetness is a ledger of risk. News from the west is not always calm. A seam collapses in the lower drift. 2 men limp. 1 does not rise. You close the drift for inspection and send wages to the families before anyone writes to ask. The answer arrives with gratitude and a gentle rebuke. The foreman should have told you first. You apologize without ornament. Being right late is a kind of wrong. Over wine with a northern envoy, you argue softly about tariffs. He wants lower duties on timber. You want roads that survive rains. You propose a seasonal reduction paired with a shared crew to maintain bridges. He laughs when the numbers make more sense than pride. You laugh with him. The room grows warmer. The king, distant yet present like weather, passes you once in a corridor and says nothing. You bow. It is not avoidance. It is the correct angle for a life spent in service. You do not need the sun to describe Tuesday to know Tuesday turned out fine. You simply continue the work the sun would approve of if it asked. Rats do not respect policy. You push for kennels in the poorer wards and stipends for those who keep them well. A lord scoffs. Another smiles. 3 months later, grain loss shrinks, and the scoffer calls it luck. You do not correct him. Weather and luck are generous masks for systems that want to be invisible. You become more deliberate with your days. Mornings for petitions, afternoons for inspections, evenings for letters that require both clarity and sleep. When you err, you say so swiftly. When others do, you decide whether the lesson is cheaper than the punishment. Most lessons are. You spend them like coin and keep the peace in circulation. Some nights, court feels like a theater, where even the ushers carry knives made of compliments. You can feel the invisible pressure of your name pressed against the back of your neck. It is not a shout, it is a steady hand guiding your chin. On those nights, the collar of expectation feels worse than a slave, because you fitted it yourself and must wear it smiling. Yet the city teaches rewards for gentleness that the rock could not. A magistrate who was your harshest critic now sends you the tightest statutes, pared clean of vanity. A fishmonger who once cheated now sends flawless weights. Consistency, it seems, writes its own song, and the city starts humming along. A dispute over ferry rights on the Blackwater drags across 3 sessions. You ride out at dawn with both petitioners and switch boats midstream. On the slower boat, you keep silent until they notice the difference in current. They argue with the river, see the foolishness, and sign in the shade of a willow, as if the tree itself were a notary. You visit the Guild of Translators and leave a donation for more classes in Low Valyrian and the dialects of traders from afar. Understanding saves coin where force spends it. Later, when a sailor from Volantis negotiates dock fees, his gratitude is brief but clear as brass. He leaves a bolt of orange cloth you do not need and a rumor you might. Rumors are vines. Let them climb a trellis and they fruit. You choose one, a whisper about forged stamps on a salt barge. You ask for quiet checks, find the forgery, and replace punishment with training and a bonus for accuracy. No songs are written about such victories, which is one reason they last. Season turns, and the Red Keep thins as hunting parties depart. The city breathes easier without pageantry. You take advantage of the quiet to repair a market roof and rewrite 2 policies so plain even your enemies quote them. You keep your head down and your sentences upright. Sleep improves. Home sends you a story about a child cured by a lemon wedge and patience. You reread it after a dull banquet and prefer it to every toast. It is the same lesson repeated. Gold is loud. Care is effective. You stick the letter in your sleeve and carry its warmth through a cold corridor. Not all corridors are kind. A lord with polished boots steps too close to a scullery maid and laughs when she flinches. You step between them and look at his boots, then at him, then at the door. He leaves. You do not write this down, yet you feel it balance a ledger you did not know had gone crooked. There is a day when everything goes wrong. A shipment spoils. A bridge audit reveals theft. A scribe misfiles your cleanest statute. You go walking instead of shouting. By the time your boots return white with dust, the worst fires have burned out. What remains can be solved with bread, patience, and a letter that begins, simply, I erred. On a clear morning, you host a meeting between a Bravosi factor and a dock guildmaster who refuses to bend. You tell a story about barrels, hoops, and staves seeking their proper place, then go silent. By the end, the men shake hands and disagree cheerfully, which is a kind of peace a city can sustain. You write to a septon who preached thunder, asking for rain instead. He replies with a softer sermon and a question about the poor in the clothmaker's alley. Together you arrange a fund kept in a locked box with 3 different keys. No one sings about locks that no one breaks, but you sleep better knowing they exist. The king speaks to you at last. A single sentence about a road in the west. You answer in the same economy and include a map with stones marked in red. He nods once. Weather. Again. You return to your desk and spend that nod sparingly. Like a bright coin you do not want to lose. With winter nibbling the edges of autumn, the city grows sharper. You propose incentives for merchants who keep prices level when storms trap ships. A few call it interference. Others call it decency. That pays back. You call it a hedge against panic, and the numbers prove you right before anyone feels noble. Sometimes you are lonely in the middle of everything. The rock was a solitude you chose. The capital is a crowd that insists. You write to your aunt to ask for a small piece of advice and receive a page with 4 sentences. Listen longer, ask simpler, decide later, eat when you can. You tape it inside a drawer where no one looks. Peace where it appears is unspectacular. A week without fires. A market day where no one is cheated. Petitions that end with handshakes instead of oaths. You begin to think that success at court will never look like triumph. It will look like the absence of spectacle. You are content with that and think perhaps contentment is what people mistake for boredom. As your season stretches, you see the edges of your influence and accept them. You cannot mend every seam, guide every ship, or steady every boast. You can make rooms slightly kinder and numbers slightly truer. A city is too large to be controlled, but it can be persuaded, and you prefer persuasion to dominion. When the summons home arrives, it carries the smell of the sea even through 2 seals. You close your books, pay what you owe, forgive what will buy better mornings, and pack with the calm of someone who has learned what not to take. The road west will taste of juniper again, and the rock will listen to your footsteps with its usual polite attention. Before you leave, you walk once more to the fish market at dawn. The mussel seller is there, now with a new apron and fewer lines on her brow. You buy nothing, only thank her for remembering the city when it forgets itself. She laughs and tells you to carry that habit home. Harbors need it most when the sea looks very friendly. Morning arrives with its quiet signature, a curl of steam from the kitchens, the sound of a broom escorting dust toward a door, gulls arguing in their bright dialect. You wake inside the rock's measured weather and remember that reputation is a climate of its own. It warms rooms when needed and makes draughts when mishandled. The table in your solar holds 6 neat stacks. In the first are debts owed to the house, each line a thread that connects far storefronts to this stone. In the second are debts the rock owes in turn, promises that kept bridges standing and nets mended when storms pressed hard. The third stack is correspondence from bannermen. The fourth, petitions from guilds. The fifth, ledgers from the mines. The last, blank paper that will become tomorrow's climate if your sentences wear the right weight. Coins clink, a clean music. When a carpenter is paid on time, his daughter eats well. When she eats well, the school keeps a shingle. When the school stands, men prefer contracts over knives. Cause meets effect politely, and the realm breathes easier for it. Wax glows, soft as fruit flesh. You inspect a loan to a river trader whose barges lost cargo to an honest spring flood. The clan upriver will repay after harvest. The interest is modest and stated plainly. You approve and add a line about repairing ford stones before the thaw. Money should walk with boots on. In the yard, an envoy waits with a grievance polished thin by the road. His master claims your factors pressed a claim for ore too quickly. You hear him out, then bring the factor to the gallery and let them speak at the same window, where the sea shows its temper. Stories that face open water tend to wash themselves clean. By the time the tide turns, the grievance has become a timetable, and the envoy leaves with a letter that promises fairness and names who will check it. The rock's steward pauses at the threshold, proper as always, to recall a song you already know, the Rains of Castamere. It is sung softly in these halls, and never for victory. You treat it like a hearth, useful, warming, and not to be dragged into the street. The tale inside the tune is a boundary stone. Keep your oaths. Remember what defiance does to neighbors. Do not mistake patience for weakness. Accounts disagree on details, but the lesson refuses to argue. After midday, you walk the portrait gallery. Oils darken into patience the farther back you go. Some faces look severe, some almost kind, most simply intent on surviving their particular century. You stand before a woman whose fingers rest on a ledger instead of a sword, and feel a kinship that needs no herald. Names endure because someone refused to hurry while the room asked for haste. Visitors often ask why the rock prefers letters to lances. You explain that a lance settles one afternoon. A letter can steady 20. Steel is for doors that refuse all other keys. Until that hour, you write. The words are simple and precise. You never use two where one will hold. Loose language invites expensive misunderstandings, and misunderstanding is the most ruinous tax a house can pay. You keep a second book that no one else opens, a small register of the house's adjectives: proud, patient, exact. You add sparingly. Adjectives are like spices. Too many make a dish declare itself while starving the guests. The best description of a house is the market price of bread, the width of the road after rain, the absence of shouting in the square. A baker petitions for flour credit after a fire that spared his hands, but not his racks. The cause is unforgiving. The solution is not. You lend him grain and ask only that he teach 3 apprentices to make consistent loaves. Skill repays debts more faithfully than coin. Months later, the square smells of crust, and an old woman claims your bread tastes of clean water. You write her words in your private book and count that line as interest earned. A rider from Case brings news of a cargo of tin stuck behind a fallen tree on the coast road. You dispatch workers with saws, promise a day's pay and hot soup, and remind the factor to send letters of thanks to the 2 villages that hosted the men overnight. Gratitude travels cheaper and farther than coin. It keeps doors from learning to close. Sometimes reputation is a sail you mend with single stitches. A Bravosi banker has started to doubt a partner here. He has reasons, some sound, some borrowed. You lay out figures like a clean table, point to errors you could have hidden, and accept a smaller profit now for trust later. The banker smiles with only his eyes. His next letter arrives faster than the tide. At the afternoon's end, you meet with young heirs from banner houses, Marbrand, Lefford, Brax. They have the eagerness of colts and the worry of foals. You tell them the same thing an aunt once told you. Keep your words short, your roads long, and your temper in the shade. One laughs and asks for something more practical. You hand him a list of bridge weights and the cost of repair if ignored for a season. He does not laugh after that. He nods and pockets the page as if it were a charm. Ravens bring the crown's request for a loan on very favorable terms. To the crown, you keep your face polite and ask for receipts that do not tremble when held to daylight. In reply comes a courtier's smile pinned to parchment. You hold out for clarity. Lending to kings is like climbing wet stairs. Possible dignified, and best done with someone holding a lamp at the top. As twilight leans on the harbor, a singer in the lower ward tunes his harp to a quiet version of the old song. He does not know you listen from the balcony. His voice is soft, nearly a hum, and the words lose their teeth. Children play nearby, tapping the tune into a game that ends in laughter. You feel the house exhale. Songs can warn without wounding if sung at the right volume. Your reputation walks ahead of you when you visit the counting house. The clerks sit straighter, and papers seem to tidy themselves. You make a point of loosening the room's shoulders with small questions about families, gardens, weather. When people believe they can breathe in your presence, they bring you their whole truth. Whole truths are cheaper to manage than tidy lies. A strip of land between two farms has become a local courtroom. Both claim the strip, both have old papers, both employ cousins who will throw stones if asked. You bring them to the shrine that marks the flood remembered by the stone. There you say nothing for a time. The wind answers in the grass. At last one farmer admits his grandfather folded the boundary wrong after the flood. The other offers him grazing 2 weeks each year as apology return with interest. You add a fence post and call it judged. Not all memory is generous. When a merchant mentions your house in the same breath as threats, you do not answer in kind. You send him a list of the last 10 times you forgave fees after storms and the last 5 times you refused bribes even when refusal cost you. The letter ends with the phrase, "We remember our name by means other than volume." He replies with a correction and a cheaper price for rope. Behind the velvet of reputation is the ordinary patience of maintenance. You approve coin for lime on walls, small silver for lamp wicks, fair wages for scribes who will outlive you. Glory lies to immortality about its price. Maintenance speaks plainly and hands you the bill. You pay it with relief because you have slept better on well-oiled hinges. There is the matter of a cousin who borrows prestige too easily. He signs letters with the lion he has not yet earned and expects doors to open as if they were cousins too. You ask him to ride with you to the villages that remember winter, and you make him deliver bread to households whose recollections are longer than his reach. After 3 days, he returns the signet he borrowed and asks for permission to study ledgers instead. You grant it and feel the house thank you under your feet. A dispute at the docks turns theatrical when a guildmaster arrives with 10 men to make his argument heavy. You reduce the audience to 3, move the conversation to a quiet room, and pour water. Arguments shrink when chairs are comfortable, and the only applause is the sound of a cup being set down. By nightfall, the guildmaster leaves with a compromise he will soon call his idea. You do not mind the theft. You planned it. From the east, a caravan brings silk that looks like poured dawn. The price is high, the market shallow. You buy less than you wish to and spread it thinly through the houses most likely to wear it without forgetting to bend their heads. Luxuries are not sins. They are weather. If the summer is generous, the silk will flutter in windows. If winter bites, no one will resent seeing the cloth turned into blankets for cradles. A septon asks you to sponsor repairs on a wayhouse where the poor may shelter during storms. You agree, but request a door facing the road and another facing the fields, so the house belongs to travelers and workers alike. Holiness, you suspect, walks faster when it has 2 exits. The septon chuckles and blesses the carpenter's hands. In your private book, you write a sentence about the song, not the blood in it, nor the pride, but the warning about forgetting that rooms have memories. A house is a chorus carried by people who will never see the counting house or the solar. You are steward not of the refrain, but of the pauses that keep it bearable to sing. By season's end, the harbor lists fewer disputes, the mines report fewer injuries, and the market sells bread at a price that makes stew possible. These are small proofs. A proud man would demand banners. You prefer receipts. When the wind blows from the west, you can smell the city's calm. It smells like soap, onions, and wet rope drying. Your name buys you less than you expected and more than you deserve. It opens doors that lead to obligations you could not imagine as a child. Some evenings you set the signet on the sill and watch it match the color of the dusk. The lion is beautiful and heavy, and at times a collar. On those evenings the weight feels worse than a slave, because there is no master to blame, only your own hand choosing the clasp. Yet you return to the table each morning because someone must. Reputation left untended becomes rumor. Rumor breeds waste. Waste breeds hunger. Hunger breaks the quiet that lets children sleep. You have learned that the best legacy of a name is not fear nor splendor, but a city that forgets itself less often. You pause over the mint records for a moment longer than usual. The essay weights are sound, the edges honest, the portrait crisp enough that even the smallest lines do their work. You remember the maester's line that coin is a promise struck in metal, and that a wobbly promise travels badly. So you sign off on the dies, send for more copper for small change, and write a note reminding the mint to keep the beaded border sharp. A clean coin makes even a weary market stand a little straighter. You write to a heart the reach that still remembers a Westerland shipwright who sent advice after storms. You ask after families by name and include a small chart of tide cycles that helped you last season. You write to a wine factor in the Riverlands and mention the cooper whose hoops never split. In the afternoon, you hear cases in a room with 2 windows and a door that does not squeak. 2 brothers appear with a quarrel about inheritance. They bring 3 witnesses, 5 memories, and a 6th that refuses to settle. Instead, you choose between outcomes, which leaves the farm standing, which keeps the men speaking, which sets a pattern others can survive. You write the division in careful lines, add a clause about winter wood, and tell them to bring you the first cord they cut as proof of agreement. When you return to the balcony, the singer has switched to a sailing tune older than any lord. Below, 2 children make boats from bark and race them along the gutter. The boats snag at a bend and then slip free. You prefer these victories to the kind that require trumpets. They teach the same lesson without bruising anyone who did not ask to be taught. Before sleep, you enter one more line under the heading Debt and Favor. It reads, "We ask less loudly than we repay." The words look almost too plain for a lion's house, yet they please you. Modesty in ledgers makes generosity possible in the streets. You sleep with the shutters cracked to let the sea's breath wander the room. Between tides, the house is quiet enough to think without effort. Reputation, you decide, is attention paid over years to the same simple virtues: clarity, punctuality, proportion. You turn the lamp down and keep one sentence for morning. Begin with what is owed and end with what is kind. The rest will take care of itself. The letter arrives with no surprise in it, only seal and sense. Marriage, it says, the way a map says road. Not a demand, not even a detour. Simply the route that keeps the wagons from sinking when the ground turns soft. You read the names, weigh the lines about ports and pastures, and feel how a house asks a person to become a bridge others may cross without paying toll. Arrangements begin with courtesy. You send fruit and respectful words. The other house sends cloth and a calm reply. Between the gifts stands a septon who has seen 100 vows and remembers the ones that lasted because people fought for them kindly. He is practical about romance and reverent about bread. A good marriage, he says, is less a ballad than a granary opened when it matters. You meet in a solar bright with afternoon. There is talk of dowry, of holdings that lean toward river or hill, of shipping rights, of the price of timber in spring when boats need new ribs. The words sound like business and feel like care. A union, after all, is a promise to keep storms from turning 2 roofs into one ruin. Your intended is not a stranger by the time the lists are agreed. Letters shuttle like swallows. Some speak of trade, some carry small stories about gardens and the stubborn honesty of an old hound. You answer in the same key. When you finally stand face to face, the The recognition is not lightning. It is a lamp set on a table already laid, ordinary and welcome. The sept where vows will be spoken is cleaned as if for winter, all fastenings checked, and wax boiled fresh. The scepter instructs you in the gesture that matters most, not the kiss, but the listening shaped like consent. It is simple enough to be overlooked and powerful enough to make the day hold. You practice until your hands know it without your eyes. There are politics that attend even happiness. A bannerman wishes to seat 3 cousins closer to the high table. Another nudges for a toast that sounds like a treaty. You give them both something kinder than they asked for. A longer dance for the cousins, a quieter thanks for the nudge. People accept gentleness as if it were their idea. On the morning itself, smoke rises thin and faithful from kitchen chimneys. Musicians warm their fingers by the ovens and test the first notes of a slow song. You wear plain gold, your intended wears restraint dressed as grace. When you kneel for the vows, the stone is cool through the carpet, and the candles make small suns along the aisle. You promise what you can carry, and nothing you cannot. What follows looks like festival and works like policy. The right people sit near the right people, and conversation makes a web strung safely over the old gaps. Your uncle discusses wool with a man who has only ever spoken of steel. A cousin learns the true price of salt by listening. The pairing of dancers is its own diplomacy, and the food ends before the patience does, which is the only measure that matters. Later, when the hall empties and the last plate flickers with candlelight, you find a quiet balcony and speak plainly about what you want. You both want roofs that outlast winter and roads that do not collapse under spring melt. You want rooms where a child can sleep while adults argue elsewhere. You want to keep the name bright without letting it blind you. Agreement arrives without ceremony and feels like food. Days acquire a comfortable grammar. You divide the labor of letters the way kitchens divide the labor of soups and roasts. Your intended is better with envoys who prefer charm to charts. You write regulations that would bore a singer but save a doc. In the evenings, you trade accounts of small victories, a petition that required only patience, a contract that did not demand a liar's flourish. There are moments when marriage feels like a clever machine. Turn the crank of courtesy, and water rises in a dry well. Choose the gear that smooths family pride, and the cart rolls without spilling its load. But there are also hours when the gears grind, and you both hear the old teeth in them. Those hours ask for oil made from silence and sleep. You apply both and let the machine rest. Your house expects heirs. The scepter speaks softly about it, the midwives more plainly. The realm counts months with you, not cruelly, not always kindly, simply because futures weigh more when 2 houses have balanced them on a hope. When the day finally comes and a child arrives ruddy and unimpressed by titles, relief feels like a harbor after bad weather. You keep the room crowded only with quiet. Godswood and sept each receive your thanks. You split the gifts between them. Candles for the sept, herbs for the tree, because the West believes in both shaped prayer and the kind that rises like sap. No choir sings. No ravens are sent. Instead, you add another rule to your private book. Share credit with the gods and keep the crib clean. Fostering begins gently. A cousin's boy comes to train in letters. A neighbor's daughter spends a season learning kitchens and keys. You make space where their pride can stand comfortably without bumping into your own. They write to homesick parents and are allowed to be clumsy without being lectured. Houses knit themselves with such quiet threads. You feel them hold when storms pull. Not every proposal is accepted. A match for a cousin falls apart when the numbers do not add up, though the smiles looked perfect. Another alliance doesn't survive the walk from rumor to parchment. These refusals feel like stones set aside for a better wall later. You offer parting gifts that keep dignity alive, because bitterness corrodes future bridges. The hardest bargaining often happens with yourselves. There is the opportunity that glittered and then dulled when its true cost arrived. There is the slight you want to answer and choose to archive instead. You sit with tea and write two letters, the one you will send and the one you will never sign. Writing the unsent version cools the room. Sending the other keeps tomorrow open. Some nights you lie awake listening for ships that will not arrive for days. Worry tries to rent a chamber in your chest. You charge at triple and refuse to furnish. In the morning, problems look smaller when divided across two pairs of hands and three sensible errands. Partnership proves itself in errands more than in vows. There are customs that soften what arrangements harden. On the first day of each month, you eat working folks' fare in the kitchens: porridge, onion, black bread. On the last day, you eat with the stewards and give them the floor. The tradition begins as theater and becomes truth you would miss if you forgot it. Pride digests better when it sits at the same table as the people who keep the house walking. One winter, the harbor freezes enough to slow the season's last ships. You open a banquet hall and turn it into a market where small traders sell without fees. Lanterns hang like modest stars from rafters. Children run in hallways that rarely hear their feet. Your intended suggests a corner for menders of pots and boots. Work and warmth braid, and the town remembers the house with a fondness that costs little and returns much. Gossip visits despite good work. Someone says your marriage is only ledger and no laughter. Someone else says laughter is a mask for cunning. You shrug and keep feeding the market. A singer chooses a tune that flatters you. You ask him next time to flatter the fishers instead. Compliments stick better to the people who need them to weather a long day. Letters from the capital are not always courteous. A courtier pressing for concessions tries to compliment your looks as if the compliment were a key. You answer with weights and measures, tide charts and cellar counts. Beauty may be politic, but it does not move timber down a road after rain. The courtier, seeing no door, finds a gate elsewhere, and the road remains useful. Every family keeps a drawer of difficult papers. Yours holds oaths made by ancestors that no longer match the roads and rivers of now. You cannot erase them. You can reinterpret them so that people do not trip over dead language. A clause about a levy becomes a clause about service days. A boast becomes a promise to show up with tools. No one sings about reinterpretation, yet it keeps tempers cool. Your intended teaches you the value of mending in public. After a mistake at table, your mistake, you apologize first to the slighted guest, then to the room in a single sentence that accepts blame without courting drama. The apology costs one breath and returns a week of calmer corridors. Quiet courage often sounds like please and thank you. There are days when the collar of expectation rests more heavily than any chain. An envoy hints that your house should punish a minor slight with a major show. You choose restraint and send soup instead. The envoy frowns as if robbed of theater. You sleep better than he does. Sometimes the collar feels worse than a slave, not because you lack choices, but because you must keep choosing the one that serves people who will never learn your name. As years find their number, you grow less interested in cleverness that leaves no bread. You seek bargains that make someone else's morning measurable and good. A road paved where feet would have suffered. A bridge widened by a handspan. Fees shaved off for those who carry the realm on their backs, while the realm looks at banners. You also learn when to say no. A tourney that promises prestige but drains purses. A ship gilded where it should be caulked. A fashion that devours coin without warming a single child. Saying no grows easier when you can point to a yes that helps. People respect a door that closes gently and for reason. On an autumn afternoon, you and your intended walk through the vineyard that climbs the cliff in tidy lines. The leaves flare and curl. You talk about succession the way winemakers talk about pruning. Take less than fear suggests. and more than pride allows, the vines will fruit again, because hands were honest at the right time. When sickness shadows the house, you apply the arithmetic of kindness. Rooms are aired, basins warmed, duties redistributed without speeches. The scepter blesses the lintels with salt water, and the maester insists on patience as medicine. You write letters that say only what helps. Recovery arrives like a tide without trumpets. Gratitude is spoken once and then turned into bread for the staff. A marriage is made of repeated departures and returns. You watch your intended ride east to settle a timber quarrel. You ride north to audit a levee where numbers broke under haste. The reunions are not dramatic. They are chairs pulled closer to a fire, the exchange of notes, a shared joke about a stubborn wheel. The ordinary carries you farther than any feast. Toward the end of a long year, you revise the rules of hospitality. Minstrels are still welcome, but so are menders. Storytellers still sing, but so do accountants who can teach a village how to tally fairly. People laugh at first, then stop laughing when the winter proves easier than the last. Songs continue, only now they share a table with numbers that feed people on a Wednesday. At last, you look back and see how the road widened while you were not watching. The arrangement that began as arithmetic grew into a companionship you depend on as you depend on the tide. There are unromantic days, and there are quiet glories. You choose both and call it blessed work. In the ledgers, the entry under marriage is neither expense nor income. It is infrastructure, a maintained bridge that keeps a valley connected to itself. So the vows continue in practice. Bring a chair, pour for others first, say less than you can, and do more than you must. The house walks easier when two people carry the same corner of the day. You sleep with the window cracked and the wind rehearsing spring in the dark. Grateful for roofs that do not leak and a table where decisions taste like supper. You light one candle and let gratitude pool quietly, like warm tea in winter for tired hands. The first warning is not a trumpet but a rumor that refuses to tire. Markets repeat it. Courtyards adjust their posture. A banner rides where a letter should have walked. Out beyond the vineyards, riders like small storms cross from field to field, and the ravens grow busy enough that the rookery smells of ink. Someone somewhere has thrown a stone into the shallow peace, and the ripples have learned to travel. You have been taught what to do when the realm forgets how to be quiet. You call banners because the law has a shape, and that shape must stand. Yet even as you summon men, you summon wheat. War is a hunger that argues with itself. It devours the food needed to survive it. So you start with bread. Bakers receive flour at cost. Mills are promised wood and repair. Your first orders smell of yeast. Levies assemble in the yard with the silence of people who already know the price. You count boots and blankets before you count blades. A hungry soldier forages honesty into resentment. A cold soldier turns planks into fuel. You make your lists in the order that keeps markets alive. Oats for horses, salt for meat, carts for roads. The master-at-arms nods when you inspect harness leather as if it were a treaty. Some argue for spectacle. Banners high, drums loud, speeches generous with promises. You choose another arithmetic. Quietly you buy nails. Quietly you hire carpenters and send them ahead to mend bridges the way physicians steady breathing. Where a flamboyant host turns fields into songs, a prepared host leaves fences standing and neighbors speaking. Some call this soft. You call it respectful, and respect survives winter better than applause. Your intent wears a plain face. You mean to keep roads open, granaries sealed, tempers low. You mean to make war trip over your prudence and land softly in a field that will still grow barley next year. There is pride in this, but it is not the kind that needs a song. It is the pride of barrels neatly stacked against a wall that will not fall in a wind. When the enemy chooses to stand, the line creeps toward you as if it too were reluctant to argue. Your captains speak in short sentences that do not require bravery to believe. Positions are taken. Scouts melt and return. Signals flicker and stop. You ask for the quartermaster's numbers, and he answers like a singer who knows too many funerals. Enough for today if we stay wise. Enough for tomorrow if we remember to count. You do not ride alone to the front. You ride to the hill behind it. There the world looks like a map drawn by weather. You can see which groves want to be shields and which ditches have learned to hold secrets. You do not speak of valor. You speak of shade and water and the angle of ground that will spare a hamstring. Men trust orders that name what their bodies already understand. Battle is noise followed by lists. You sort the lists into what can be mended and what must be mourned. Wounds are counted. Grain is counted. Promises are counted until counting looks like prayer. You keep mourning short in public so the living may continue, and long in private where photographs of ancestors look like witnesses. The quartermaster brings you bread because leaders forget to eat when numbers look like grief. You thank him and chew dutifully. War strains courtesy until it thins. You stop this where you can. Wagons with salt arrive at a village that knows proverbs about armies and salt. You unload, stack neatly, leave a note on the door of the storehouse with your seal and your full name. In the morning, a grandmother brings you a basket of carrots and says nothing. The basket is worth more than a speech. The realm fractures toward zeal. Some houses want thunder from you. Others want you to be a cloud that carries rain without announcing itself. You remain a steward among generals. When forced to choose, you choose actions that spare harvests and voices that will still cheer at weddings. These choices do not dazzle. They survive. Winter sides with neither banner. Snow complicates everything. Horses sweat into chill. Bread goes heavy. Tempers clench. You adjust the arithmetic to include warmer tents and fewer night marches. A captain suggests a punishing push before the thaw. You ask about boots and wheels instead of banners. The push becomes a pause. No ballad marks the wisdom, but a dozen children see spring because their fathers did not freeze, carrying a boast uphill. There is an old rule you remember from the yard. Do not swing if stepping back would do. You apply it to supply. When a storehouse stands in a village that has already hosted too many strangers, you send for extra guards, locals, first, to keep order. You assign a scribe to record full names at the door, and you pay 1 copper for every time a barrel is lifted. Order is not free. You budget for it. You also budget for apologies. A cart breaks a fence. You pay twice the lumber and once the pride. The farmer nods and returns to his work. In the evening, he brings an apple for your horse and says nothing about politics. He votes with his saw and his quiet. You consider that a landslide and make a note to deliver nails to his shed when winter eases. Rumor insists on eating where soldiers eat. You feed it better fare. At campsite fire pits, you ask the cooks to share news that is true and dull. How many boots repaired? How many miles saved by a repaired plank road? Which villages bake bread hottest at dawn? Dullness is a salve. Men who think about bread think less about ghosts. None of this keeps sorrow away. Scouts bring back names you recognize and details you refuse to carry to bed. You write to families with ink that does not tremble. Heavy sentences become lighter when they step down from the dais of cliché. You tell one mother that her son saved a cart from rolling. She writes back to say she will now bless every cart she sees. Grief survives better when given something practical to do. An ally suggests harsh levies on villages that favored another banner. You refuse and explain with maps and a story about a spring flood that ran down the wrong furrow and taught the valley humility. Allies prefer certainty to nuance. They sulk, then shrug. You maintain a habit you would want applied to your own people if the wind turned. Some nights, the collar of command sits like ice. The house expects victory and the realm expects thrift. And both expectations have sharp teeth. It can feel worse than a slave. this chosen servitude, because pride refuses to share the blame. When dawn arrives with more lists, you answer with sleep when you can, with a walk among the picket fires when you cannot. The men nod and go on believing the next day will be manageable. You follow their example. At times, you must negotiate with enemies whose boots are as muddy as yours. You choose a field with foxholes of old rain. The first talk is about water and wood. The second names where neither side will burn barns. You draft a parchment that seems thin enough to tear in a hand, yet it holds. A week later, 2 barns remain unburned. This is what you call progress, and the singers do not. War produces accountants who now speak like surgeons. They make grim sense. Arrows saved by moving a cart road. Lives saved by spending the best mules early instead of late. Tempers saved by letting men write home more often than tradition allows. You adjust customs by inches and pay the interest in quiet morale. Commanders who scoff at such inches later find they needed yards. You prefer not to learn that way. You keep the grain moving by water where you can. A barge carries more bread than a hero, and the river does not require a trumpet to tell it which way to flow. But rivers also listen to weather, and so you fund the dredging of 2 bends and the reinforcement of a dock that a wiser era would have mended already. The dockmaster writes thanks in a hand that looks like old rope and new hope. Not every village greets you with a full bucket. A boy throws a clod at your horse and does not run. You dismount and hand him an apple. He does not take it. You set it on a post and ride on. An hour later you look back and the apple is gone. You make a note to send the village iron tools once the road is safe. Mercy that keeps working after you leave is the only kind worth packing. Spring remembers its job. Mud loosens, and so do tempers. You begin to unstack the pavilions and send men home by creeks that have learned to speak again. Larders are thin in the outlying farms. You release credit for seed and salt. You will collect gently after harvest. Small mercies now become large allegiances later, and generosity shown in mud is remembered when roads turn to dust. A letter arrives from the capital that reads like it was drafted by Vanity's scribe. It demands more men and fewer questions. You send both, in a sense, a smaller levy and a longer attached account of why boots last longer when soap is issued. To your surprise, the next letter asks for the soap list. You send it with a bar, wrapped in plain cloth. No thanks return, only fewer complaints. In the lull between movements, you review maps that grew tired of being accurate months ago. Villages have shifted allegiance as hunger and rumor tug. You redraw lines in pencil and remind yourself that maps are polite lies that require frequent apologies. You apologize by funding wells and by assigning a midwife to travel with the grain wagons. Babies arrive according to no man's timetable. You prefer they arrive to hands warm with clean water. If the war has taught you anything, it is the speed at which dignity can be spent. You ration it carefully. Officers take morning watch with men. The quartermaster eats last. The priest listens before speaking. You correct yourself in public when wrong, not to shine, but to bleach error before it stains. These small acts are not decoration. They are scaffolds that keep the roof standing until the carpenters can do better work. At last, the larger tides move away from your coast. The ravens rest. The rookery smells of feathers and stale ink instead of alarm. You begin the work that never sings. Audits, repairs, letters of thanks, letters of apology, payments to widows, wages for builders. You walk your old roads and find them mostly where you left them. Where they are broken, you assign people who know how to make them humble and strong again. The men come home with faces suddenly young in the light of kitchens. Some sit outside the door and breathe until they believe the quiet is real. You arranged for a cask in the square and first draws for those who carried the heaviest loads. It is not payment, only a handshake with foam. Laughter returns slowly, then loyally. Markets are shy. They step back into themselves as if entering cold water. Your letters after war are the hardest to write and the most important. You thank villagers by name and at length. You keep receipts for everything, even kindness that expects none. You list not only what people gave, but what they refused to take. Pride likes to tally its own sacrifices. You prefer to tally the restraint that kept barns and tempers intact. The last task is always quiet, returning the house to its measured weather. You put away drums you never used and polish the scales that weighed the realm while it trembled. Children sleep through the night again. The baker no longer counts soldiers with his loaves. You visit the storehouses and find them modest and sufficient. You touch the door frames as if greeting horses after a storm. One evening, when the harbor oil lamps lift calm halos onto the water, you write a final entry under war in your private book. It has only 4 lines. Protect roads, pay on time, keep songs short, feed the living. You close the book and hear the sea approve without sound. The arithmetic holds. The realm will forget. It always does. But the roads will remember, and that is how peace finds its way home, gently. Morning carries a clear note, like glass tapped once and left to ring. You wake into tasks that would bore a swordsman and delight a harbor. There is no battle listed on the day's ledger, only a series of small hinges that must not squeak. You breathe, rise, and put your hand on the doorknob of policy. The first rule is listening longer than pride prefers. You host a meeting where 3 people say the same complaint with different adjectives. Their accents tell you where the winter bit hardest. You let each finish, then ask the smallest question. What would work by next market day? The room exhales, and solutions arrive with a plain smell of rope. Second, ask simpler. A steward brings you a plan for rearranging stalls in the upper market. It is elegant and wrong, full of right angles that will drown in rain. You step into the street with him and kneel where the gutter clogs. 2 chalk lines later, the plan looks dull and durable, which is what markets prefer. Third, decide later than the room expects, but earlier than neglect would choose. Delay is not a strategy, it is a weather vane. You watch which way worry leans, then you set the post before gusts rise. People call you patient, then grateful, then consistent, and finally boring. Boring is the anthem of roofs that do not leak. These rules do not come printed on banners. They grow from repetitions that used to be called chores. You keep practicing them until instinct can carry a day, while thought handles the rare storm. A good habit is the steward you can afford to underpay, because gratitude is its wage and repetition its breakfast. When a Brax envoy tries to bargain with flattery, you smile without moving. He calls your restraint legendary. You call it the price of admission. He wants a shortcut through the forest levy. You offer a timetable and a sawmill credit. The shortcut dies, and the saws sing. People mistake charm for levers. You prefer gears that do not slip. A scroll arrives alleging your mint shaved a coin. The letter is sharp enough to cut cloth. You do not answer in the same metal. Instead, you invite the accuser to weigh 3 purses in your hall, 1 filled by you, 1 by him, 1 by a neutral hand. He attends, reddens, and leaves with a lesson that costs you only an afternoon of measured patience. The court in King's Landing calls you to mediate a quarrel between 2 guilds who hate their own reflection. You ask them to trade ledgers for an hour, then set them side by side and walk them through each entry like a slow hymn. By the end, what they needed was not judgment, but perspective. You give them the smallest decree possible and a shared book they now understand. A young knight wants your counsel on honor. His voice shakes like a new bridge. He believes honor lives best at volume. You tell him it lives best when no one applauds, and you send him to deliver bread to a ward where no songs are sung. When he returns, he speaks more quietly and listens more loudly, which is all you hope to accomplish. Politics asks for a talent that looks like cowardice to men who need trumpets. You keep your tone shaped for the room where children sleep. A lord demands reprisals. You draft receipts. Another wants parades. You send tools. He calls you humorless, then borrows your wrenches 3 weeks later. The 4th rule is to keep promises small enough to fulfill without weather's permission. You do not proclaim prosperity. You fix the crane at the quay. You do not swear to cleanse the city. You fund night soil carts and pay the drivers before dawn. You do not vow to make streets safe. You train watchmen to recognize anger earlier. Grandness is so fragile. Specific kindness survives. You still visit the armory. Steel has a place under any sun, but you polish caution as often as helms, and you keep the practice yard for posture, not swagger. A sword that remains sheathed because a letter arrived on time is the best use of metal you know. At times, you are accused of softness. You accept the word and sharpen it. Softness is bread added to a ration, so a quarrel becomes a conversation. Softness is a letter that begins with apology instead of history. Softness is also the firmness that closes an indulgent door gently, so it may be opened tomorrow without shame. Your influence grows by refusing to grow too quickly. You decline 2 seats you could fill because their duties would starve your mornings. You accept one that lets you audit bridges every 3rd month. People who wanted your signature learn to want your standards instead. It is slower, but it does not collapse. You learn to use absences as tools. Do not attend the meeting that exists only to bruise. Write in advance, send a clear page, and let the paper sit in the chair you refused. Even quarrels respect a document that shows up rested. By the time the room has tired of its own echo, your paragraph stands ready to be adopted. In the harbor, a pilot boat capsizes in a sudden gust. You fund more lessons for the young pilots, not funerals for the old. From then on, every page of policy you draft hides a question. Will this still work when the wind forgets to be kind? If the answer is no, you remove the flourish that required a friendly sky. Flourishes belong to flags. They should not support roofs. The 5th rule is to cultivate witnesses who are not impressed by you. A printer who complains when your commas wobble is better than a lord who praises your every sentence. A fishmonger who shrugs at your crest will tell you which law you forgot to consider. A child who asks why the fountain doesn't run will shame you into fixing what speech is ignored. Keep such people in the front row of your days. When the crown proposes a tax shaped like a knife, you ask to see the handle. Who holds it? Who gets cut when it slips? Numbers blush under such questions, then confess their crude intentions. You offer a spoon instead, less efficient for show, safer for feeding the realm you must keep whole. You become a patron of silence. Rooms you oversee develop the habit of finishing business without bruising anyone who must return tomorrow. Gossip loses its footing on floors swept by data. Boasts wear thin when placed next to receipts. At some point, your quiet is mistaken for coldness, which is fine. Cold keeps milk from spoiling. Old enemies try a new tactic, friendliness that asks you to forget. You remember politely. Memory is not vengeance, it is proportion. See, you do not deny them work. You simply price it according to their record and assign them partners who own rope and calendars. The 6th rule is to polish courtesy until it reflects consequence. When you must say no, you say it as if handing someone a warm coat. When you must say yes, you hand them a broom with it. Agreement without task is flattery, and flattery starves cities. People return to halls where decisions come with tools. You keep a shelf for mistakes, labeled and dated. There sits the policy you push too quickly and the levy you cut too slowly. You take them down once a month and show them to new clerks like heirlooms that warn. A house that displays its errors winds up with fewer. Shame, aired gently, rots into compost you can grow better habits in. In the capital, a rumor tries to conscript your name. You respond with the opposite of rumor, time. You let 3 cycles pass, then you publish a single page with nouns and numbers. By then, the rumor is tired, and the realm is hungrier for breakfast than for drama. You serve breakfast. The 7th rule is to resist theater unless you are building a stage for someone who has never been seen. You fund a hearing for dockhands and midwives. You draft chairs at their height. When they speak, policy finally remembers what mornings feel like. The room grows honest as bread cooling on a sill. Balance becomes your craft. Some days you are a weight on the scale. Others you are the fulcrum. Mostly you are the table, steady enough that people forget you exist. There is dignity in being forgotten for the right reasons. Furniture that keeps a home safe does not need a portrait. Occasionally, the collar of the name tightens with invisible fingers. A cousin begs for favoritism. An ally asks you to unsay a rule for an afternoon. You decline and then stand in the quiet that follows. That is the price. Sometimes it feels worse than a slave, this chosen narrowness, because you must police yourself while smiling at everyone. You return to the sea for correction. Waves ignore your title, which is a service you cannot buy. You sit where spray freckles the stones and relearn your scale. A gull tips on the wind, like a sentence finding its balance. You go back inside and write better. An apprentice asks how to join the game. You want to tell him to run. Instead, you hand him a broom and a ledger and say, "Begin here." He looks disappointed for an hour and grateful for a year. He learns what you learned, that glamour is a rumor fired by distance, and that the hearth burns hot only because someone kept the wood dry. The 8th rule is to leave doors a little open. Do not write policy that requires perfection to function. Leave a hinge for human error and a latch for mercy. Systems built without forgiveness behave like ice in spring. They crack, they drown, they forget they were ever water. You build yours like well bucket ropes, scratchy, strong, replaceable without stopping the work. When your hair begins to collect winter, your pace does not slow so much as simplify. You carry fewer meetings and more questions. The questions fit in a pocket and serve you where trumpets would fail. What will this cost in sleep? Who sweeps afterward? A final rule arrives without being named. Step aside before you are asked. You train the people who will forget you kindly. You flatten your signature until it looks like a road others can travel. The best compliment your city can give is to keep working when you are late to the office. You arrange to be late more often. In the archives, you cultivate a private shelf of paradox. There you keep rulings that solved one problem while feeding a smaller one, each tagged with a date it should be reconsidered. Precedent is a trustworthy lamp, but even good oil can go stale. You sniff it before you light the wick. Once a season, you invite a stonemason, a washerwoman, and a ferryman to read those pages aloud. Hearing law in working voices trims its fancy edges and reminds you that parchment is meant to be a bridge, not a wall. You end the day by watering a small fig in a wind-sheltered court. Its pot is heavy. Its leaves remember salt. Growth in a fortress requires both exposure and shelter, a paradox you accept gladly. When the fig finally fruits, you give the first bowl to clerks who seldom stand in portrait galleries. They laugh, wiping juice with sleeves inked by your demands, and they thank you with the same simple grace you practice on your better days. Before sleep, you whisper the 9th rule to no one. Leave rooms kinder, leave sums clearer, leave doors unlocked only when trust can stand guard, then rest as if safely borrowed. Evening settles with the thoroughness of a ledger closed at dusk. Windows change from mirrors to lanterns, and the sea keeps counting without you. You have learned to let it count. You consider the tally that matters most and costs no coin, but remains gentle after your hands let go. The rock receives age kindly. Stone remembers to carry weight without complaint. You slow your steps not from frailty, but to give conversations time to ripen. People adjust in the hallway, finding new rhythms that are not built on your speed. They do not call it respect, they call it comfort, which is more durable. You design your exit in the same style as your entry, practical, almost invisible. Scribes who once copied your letters now draft their own. The steward who learned to count in disasters now counts in ease without growing careless. Your pride is quiet as bread. It rises, feeds, and disappears into people who walk sturdier for it. The archives become your orchard. You prune what grew wild, graft lessons from winters onto summers that forgot frost. A law that chafed is softened. A rule that drifted is anchored. You set small stones on shelves to mark which pages were most used. Later, when someone asks where to begin, the stones answer. You see your name less on paper and more in habits. Clerks pause before signing as you taught them. Guards bring water before they bring questions. The harbor keeps its broom near the hook where everyone can find it. These are the monuments you prefer, built of repetition and human ease. There is ceremony to endure and ceremony to employ. You endure the former with a patience that looks like affection. When honored in halls, you thank cooks and assistants by name. When employed, ceremony becomes a lantern, guiding the young toward duties they cannot yet adore. You use both with the economy of a candle held to a single wick. Inheritance is heavier than gold. You prepare your child for it with chores, not speeches. He or she, history will decide the pronoun, learns to oil hinges, tally rent, and apologize steadily. When they ask for swords, you hand them buckets. They complain. Then they notice how many fires never spark where water is near. The hardest lesson to give is the one you resisted receiving: attention as a form of love. You teach it with walks along the quay and by letting silence claim the fourth sentence. It works slowly, like vinegar tenderizing a tough cut. Years later, when your child hears a complaint that could become a riot, they listen until the noise becomes a sentence. The city notices before you do and relaxes a notch. You set aside a fund that exists only to correct your own future mistakes. Policies age, generosity does too. The fund pays for repairs to language you left behind and for bridges that sagged under your optimism. Successors learn they are free to adjust without injuring your ghost. Your pride again stays in the pantry and makes soup. Sometimes you recall the old song in its teeth. You do not deny it. You rehouse it, Anne. In your mind, the refrain turns from thunder to weather. It warns without crushing. Let memory be an honest guard, not a jailer that starves the house of company. As the realm changes, it forgets some of the courtesies you valued. Letters grow shorter, coins rougher, tempers quick. It would be easy to turn brittle in reply. Instead, you lean further into mixture. You add a line to a policy that gives people a second chance to be as careful as they meant. In winter, you keep company with the sea from an inner balcony where wind behaves. Sheets of rain polish the harbor so it looks like thought. You measure the weather against your bones and whisper thank you to rooms that hold. When the lamps are lit, you pretend to count them and always lose track. Losing counts becomes a kind of Sabbath from accuracy. People bring you problems when they want them explained to themselves. You listen, adjust a pronoun, and slide the solution back across the table already bearing their fingerprints. They leave taller from having recognized their own competence. What you learn painfully, you now pass easily. Leadership is a mirror arranged at the right height. You keep it clean and do not shout at it when faces frown. There are final journeys you cannot delegate. You return once to the capital for a ceremony that belongs to clocks. The city has changed, thinner in some places and richer in others, but the river keeps its elbow the way stubborn men keep grudges. You walk the docks and greet the mussel seller who no longer sells, only tells stories to anyone who buys her tea. She remembers your questions about spoilage better than your title. On the return road, you stop in villages that learned your handwriting. By the shape of your caution, people wave without crowding you. A child asks why the lion on your ring looks tired. You say lions in winter save their roar for when cubs cannot sleep. He nods as if that were doctrine and shows you the straight fence he helped mend. The rock greets you like weather you know. You thank it for not changing too dramatically while you traveled. A fig in the court has begun to shade the bench. You sit under it for letters read aloud by someone you trust. This is an old luxury and a new skill. Being read to is how you train your pride to sit still. Cracks find old mortar even in patient stone. One appears in a policy you wrote during an anxious year. It punished petty theft with a fine that hurt the wrong backs. You revise it and apologize in public for the wrong. The apology becomes a smaller story than the fairness that follows, which is precisely as it should be. At night, you sleep in a room with one window latch repaired by your own hands. The latch is not pretty, but it holds forecast and memory in the proper order. Beneath it sits your private book of rules, smudged, amended, beloved. You add one line without certainty and feel the line settle anyway. Trust is a currency. Spend it where it grows back with interest. The pencil leaves a small gray leaf at the margin. You do not brush it away. As the harbor and hills continue their unspectacular duet, you begin the tender work of erasing yourself from places where others should stand. A clerk now introduces the market decrees. A captain sets the watch. A steward handles the farmer's petition. You watch from the pillar's shadow, pleased to be briefly unnecessary. It is a difficult relief. At times, it feels worse than a slave to hold back your impulse to step in and be praised, but you learn to feed that hunger with tea and a walk. Visitors ask for advice distilled to aphorism. You offer them chores. Sweep 3 storerooms and tell me which smells like fear. Walk the pier before dawn and record which boats wake first. Write to the quietest person in every guild and ask a simple question. You keep a small garden of errors that you never quite fix, on purpose. A misaligned tile in a corridor reminds you that perfection fatigues the eye. A small stain on a ledger cover says the sea once wrote a messenger's sleeve into the room. These flaws soften rooms the way lamplight softens angles. They also tell the young that patience lives here, not performance. At a midsummer feast, you refuse the high seat and sit with guards. They talk about boots and moonlight, and how cats know when storm is near. No one notices your placement for an hour, which means your plan worked. You leave early with a full heart and a palate cleansed of praise. Your chair at the head of the hall remains empty, and someone brings in more bread. One evening you take your heir to the mines, not the polished tunnels tourists see, but the damp-ribbed galleries where timbers groan like tired men. You say little. He asks good questions, then one shallow one, then good ones again. On the way out, he touches a support post with the kind of thanks that is not yet a prayer but will find one. Age affords you a fresh patience with mystery. You stop demanding that every outcome justify itself in reports. Some mercies work quietly and never send receipts. A woman from the far hills brings a jar of honey and says it is for the winter you prevented without knowing it. You accept and do not interrogate the sweetness. Law, which was your early love, becomes your elder colleague. You no longer court its approval. You trust its company. Together you revise a tariff so that fishermen can afford to mend nets in lean months. The tariff loses teeth and gains hands. Your younger self might have preferred the glint. Your older self likes the grip. Your child, now not a child, comes home with a policy that scares you with its simplicity. It licenses storytellers to teach numbers in markets. Old you would have called it whimsical, tired you calls it timely. Within a season, ledgers improve where tales are told. You nod and say little except to pass the hat for more storytellers. The maester warns you that joints will begin bargaining with rain. You accept the terms and move certain meetings to sunlit rooms. There you discover that warmth shortens arguments the way hunger lengthens them. You recommend the practice to your heir, who takes it as another of your odd kindnesses. He will call it his idea in a year. You hope so. There comes a day when your name is introduced after your heirs. The room does not tremble. It merely shifts its weight politely toward the future. You feel light without floating. Weight returns as gratitude, which does not bruise when carried properly. In a cupboard, you keep the old signet in a dish of dry rice. It reminds you of rescued letters and of hunger averted by planning. Sometimes you slip it on and simply hold the memory of duty, then set it back to sleep. Your hands smell faintly of metal for an hour. No one remarks on it, and you are glad. You host one last mediation between neighbors who have traded small cruelties for years. You seat them near a window and pour water until the pitcher empties exactly when they finish talking. At the end, they agree to share a fence made of living willow. It will take root and outlive their argument. You consider this arboreal settlement your last neat sentence on sorcery. Winter again, then spring again. Your heir staggers under a week you would not wish on anyone. You say only, eat, then sleep. He obeys and wakes able to apologize for yesterday's temper. He returns to the hall and is forgiven without being indulged. In your final audit, you measure the house by its quiets. How many nights without alarm? How many market mornings without shouting? How often does bread sell for the same price at dawn and dusk? The answers are not songs, yet they are the lullabies you always wanted for the West. You ask the steward to change nothing dramatic when you die. No banners, no drums, no sudden charity meant to purchase tears. If anyone insists on spectacle, give them a ledger to carry. Let the rock continue its habit of mercy shaped like work. Let the harbor keep sweeping before dawn. On the last evening, you walk the cliff with someone who knows when to keep pace and when to fall back. The water lays a silver road under the low sun, and you imagine ships gliding home on it without effort. You have become suspicious of effort that needs applause. You prefer effort that needs eggs and onions and a clean table. The breeze keeps your prayers simple and mostly nameless. You leave a smaller letter on your desk for your heir. It is the opposite of instruction. It is permission. You may forget me when the room requires a lighter step. You may contradict me if the numbers ask. You may rest even when no bell tells you to. Sleep grows thoughtful, then large. You settle into it as into a boat tied securely but not tightly. If you dream, the dream is of ledgers that add to zero and of children laughing in a market where everyone eats. The sea counts on. It does not need your help to keep time anymore. Morning will come without you. That is not sorrow. It is testimony. The rock will keep its agreements with gravity. The harbor will flirt with wind and stay married to work. Your name will sit in a ledger no one opens often, which is how you always wanted legacy to behave. And somewhere a clerk you trained will say, without fanfare, "We do this because it keeps people sleeping." A watchman will nod and check the latch twice. A baker will measure by habit instead of hope. A child will race a bark boat and win against no one. The west will exhale and keep the light low.